Hello, friends, and welcome back to another set of stories about entitled people. You'd think after 30 years of living side by side, people would learn to coexist, especially over something as harmless as leaves. But one woman decided to wage a personal crusade against dandelions, poisoning her neighbor's yard in the process. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. All right, let's get into it. She spent 20 years complaining about my leaves. I gave her a yard full of cheerful yellow flowers. We've lived in this house almost 30 years, so you learn your neighbors, their quirks, their landscaping obsessions, the little rituals that mark summer and winter. For the most part, it's been fine. Then there's the woman next door. I don't have a polite name for her. She's been nothing but toxic toward us for decades. And for the most ridiculous reason, our trees drop leaves onto her yard. About 20 years ago, I pulled into the driveway after a swing shift and noticed a chemical smell so sharp it made my eyes water. My feet crunched on something when I stepped out of the Jeep, flashlight on. I saw white granules scattered across the strip of land that separates our driveways. The 6-foot-wide no man's land between our houses. Dandelions were in bloom across the neighborhood that week. I'd always let the strip grow a little because my bearded dragons love the flowers and the bees help pollinate the garden. That morning, someone had literally dusted poison over the whole thing. I went next door and asked her, calmly at first, what the hell she thought she was doing. Her answer was a litany. How the dandelion fluff blew into her yard, how unsightly it was, how she refused to deal with my carelessness. I pointed out that every house on our little court had dandelions, that this wasn't isolated to my property, but she wouldn't hear it. She considered it my fault and treated it as a moral failing on my part. Over the years, the relationship deteriorated. She'd gripe about anything, a single leaf during autumn, kids playing with the ball that landed in her yard, even birds that perched on our fence. Meanwhile, her lawn was hardly pristine. It was a patchwork of cheap seed, uneven mowing, and the occasional dead spot. It was messy and hypocritical in the worst way. She demanded perfection from everyone else while her own yard told another story. So after the herbicide incident and years of escalating passive-aggressive sniping, I decided on a quieter form of retaliation. I went to the farm supply store and bought big sacks of dandelion seed. I didn't invent anything clever, just packets of seed, the size you'd use to reseed a pasture. I waited for a night when the neighborhood was asleep and the moon was low, then took a bag and walked the property line. There's an art to scattering seed in the dark. You can't just chuck it all in one place and call it a day. You throw it in arcs. You imagine wind patterns, and you plant for cover. In our case, under the shadow of their overgrown shrubs and near the fence line, I tossed handfuls across their front bed, over near the back fence, along the rock border where the sprinkler didn't quite reach. It was petty, sure. And it felt delicious in a very small, childish way to be the anonymous hand setting the stage. Spring came, the seeds sprouted, their tidy, controlled lawn, the result of so many lectures and phone calls, became dotted with bright yellow flowers. By June, they had to look at a yard that resembled the very mess she'd blamed us for. The irony was rich. She'd poisoned my strip because a flower bothered her view, and then she had to live among hundreds of those same flowers. Did it solve anything? No, it certainly didn't fix the fundamental problem. The woman's entitlement and hostility remain, but it changed the backyard calculus. Where once I'd worried about my bearded dragons and the bees, I had none of that drama to manage. Mine stayed bloom-free because I kept the backyard mowed and tidy. Hers, full-on meadow. I won't pretend I'm proud of being petty. There are better avenues. Conversation, HOA mediation, even legal recourse for the herbicide. But 30 years of little provocations accumulate, and sometimes the only relief is small, theatrical justice that doesn't hurt anybody, just plants a stubborn, cheerful reminder that nature doesn't take orders from one person's idea of perfection. I hate to admit it, but sometimes a little dandelion revenge is exactly what a person needs, especially when dealing with someone who clearly has no respect for property lines or basic neighborly courtesy. And maybe, just maybe, they should consider that their actions are causing harm to the local ecosystem. It's a small thing, really, but it adds up. And our second story. Try to save money? Try again. This was more than a few years ago when I worked for a lowball medical home health company. I was hired as a respiratory therapist and had an area to cover roughly 150 miles out from the office. The company had issues with managers because of the loss of money and always had turnover. So my job was to set up breathing treatment machines, but the most common thing was checking on oxygen concentrators in patients' homes. At the time, I would make $25 a visit plus mileage, so you try and group the PTs and hit 3 or 4 at a shot. Every month, the PT had to be checked, and the check lasted about 15 minutes, just a fast check. So one day, we get a new manager that was really all about saving money and getting the company back on track. He started to streamline departments, and all I could hear was things were not done by the book, so he called me into the office one day. I worked from home mostly and had a talk. That the cost of driving everywhere was too high for the amount of PTs I had, and could we do something about it? Explained that there was no other way of doing my job than how I was doing it, so he came up with the idea of a phone visit. I explained, really can't do that because I could not see the equipment, and he countered with the drivers see the machines every week and can just spot check to see if they were working. So he made up a worksheet to check off the things I usually look for: hours of use, clean filters, clean machine, hoses okay and not needed repaired. Total of 10 questions. He proceeded to say I can call and have the PT give me hours and ask the questions and bill it under a visit, which I can't do because the code isn't right. So he look up all our codes for me and picks phone consult and tell me to bill under that. To cover my butt, I ask for a letter stating this, and he gives it to me the next day. Cue malicious compliance. I got all my PT numbers toward the end of the month and worked through the list and got 34 done in about 4 hours and decided that was enough to make a point. At this time, I complete my paperwork and send it to corporate with a letter from my boss telling me to bill under that type code. Week later, I get a check for $4,250 since that phone visit code was $125 per consult, mainly used for ventilators. Not bad for a part-time job. So the next week, I do a few more patients and submit my pay. Following week, I get a call from corporate asking why I was getting paid more than full-timers in executive posts. I explained everything and forwarded all the documentation to them. A week later, the manager was at his desk when a fleet of cars pulled in, and in walked HR from main office and fired him. Another lesson which the manager didn't think about was that by telling you to bill the code without documentation, you're committing fraud against Medicare. And our second story. Entitled customer gets free help, then tries to blame me for his ancient phones finally showing their age. I work in retail selling phones. We get a lot of people who need technical support come in with no intent to buy and just do a little bit of troubleshooting, especially in our area because it's a lot of older folk. Well, a while back, this middle-aged guy speaking Spanish, enough English to hold a conversation, came in with his wife and asked me to get her email back on her phone as they'd accidentally removed it. The phones are the same model, about 5 years old. He tells me they share an email, so I ask him what the username and password is, and he doesn't remember either one. No big deal. I ask for his phone, pull up the settings, and find the email, type it for him on the wife's phone, then pass it to him to reset the password and sign in. He does exactly that. It works. I hand him his phone back, then they leave. The next day, he comes in without his wife, holding both phones. His is super hot to the touch, and according to him, hers is acting strange. I first take his phone and check to make sure there's no suspicious apps downloaded, no malware, and that he doesn't have a million tabs open or anything that could overwork the battery. Everything seems okay. Then he says they were working fine until we came in yesterday. I just kind of nod in agreement because, yeah, they were fine, and move on. Then as I check hers, he says, we had no problems until we came in yesterday. I've had the phones for years without issues, but suddenly they're messing up. Now I'm slightly annoyed because he seems to be implying I'm at fault. I say, well, all I did with yours was open the settings to see your email username. I didn't download or change anything. And then he gets quiet. I'm going between the phones, and suddenly he points out my Puerto Rican coworker and asks if she can come over to speak with them because he's more comfortable speaking Spanish and she's fluent. I find that odd because he never seemed to struggle with English beforehand, but summon her anyway. As I'm turning the phones on and off, I notice his phone isn't hot anymore and nothing seems to be wrong with his wife's besides general slowness. I mean, they're old as hell and look like they've been dropped a few times. One of them was cracked in the front. But then he starts talking to my coworker, and I can understand enough Spanish to hear him basically telling her that I deliberately did something to their phones that messed them up. Very firmly, I interject and say, "Sir, I did not mess up your phones." He looks at me for a second and then continues talking in Spanish to my coworker, like he no longer speaks English, basically ignores me. I eventually get rid of him by saying that I took some apps off and freed up room on the phone and suggest giving them some time to test out any differences. Otherwise, replacing the batteries might help if they don't want to upgrade. He leaves. I ask my coworker what all he was saying, and she says, "Oh yeah, he says you broke the phones. He wants you to be held accountable." He just kept saying variations of that over and over. Like, man, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I was just doing what he asked me to. The switch to Spanish mid-accusation is the retail version of pressing the lawyer up button. Dude really tried to turn your coworker into a translator for his conspiracy theory. I love that you solved it by pretending to optimize the phone. Retail magic. Give it a placebo fix so they leave satisfied. And our last story. Neighbor tried to get my mom in trouble over a shed, lost his $40K pool instead. When you live with your mom, you get used to the quiet routines. She's retired, keeps her garden neat, listens to the radio, and has the kind of calm that makes the whole house feel soft. She's not confrontational. She'll wave to the mailman, but she won't go to war with a neighbor over a fence line. Enter Derek. The man had lived in the neighborhood all of 2 weeks before he started acting like the block sheriff. I noticed him staring over our fence one morning, squinting like he was auditing our yard. I thought nothing of it until we got a notice from the city. Apparently someone had reported our shed as an unpermitted structure. Mom's hands shook as she opened it. "That shed's been here since before the internet," she muttered, holding the letter like it was radioactive. She was proud of that shed. My dad built it back when he was still alive. She kept her tools there, bags of fertilizer, a stack of clay pots she reused every spring. And now some new guy thought he could get rid of it? The inspector came 2 days later. He looked around, measured, checked the serial plate, and said, "Everything looks fine, ma'am. It's all permitted and up to code." Mom thanked him and offered him lemonade, even though I could tell she wanted to throw it at Derek instead. When she told me what happened, she tried to brush it off. "He probably just didn't know," she said. But I caught Derek outside later that evening, watering his lawn with this smug little grin. He saw me watching and smirked. "Got to keep the neighborhood clean, you know." I smiled back, "Oh, don't worry, I'm big on that too." And that's when I decided to clean up his backyard. Derek's pride and joy was his brand new pool. He'd been bragging about it to anyone who'd listen, how he got a great deal from a private contractor, how it added value to the neighborhood. So I started digging. Public records are a beautiful thing. His pool permit was easy to find, and right there in black and white it said the pool had to be 10 feet from the property line. I took one look over the fence, 4 feet tops, maybe less. A little more reading and I saw the real gold mine. It also sat on top of a utility easement. Illegal as hell. So I gathered evidence like a good citizen, photos, measurements, exact code citations, and sent it all to the city with a polite email. 3 weeks later, I came home to find Derek pacing in his yard while 2 city trucks parked outside. The inspector spent about 15 minutes back there before handing him a packet of papers and leaving. That night, I heard him yelling on the phone, "They said it's non-compliant. I followed the damn plans." Apparently not. The following week, contractors showed up with a jackhammer. The sound of concrete breaking was music to my ears. They drained the pool, tore it up, and filled it with dirt. All 40 grand of added neighborhood value gone in a day. Now Derek's backyard's just a patch of lumpy soil and one sad deck chair sitting crooked in the corner. Every time when Mom goes out to water her garden, she waves over the fence and says sweetly, "Morning, Derek. Lovely view today." She's never slept better. Derek tried to cosplay as code enforcement and tripped over the one rule every self-appointed hall monitor forgets: scrutiny is contagious. He ended up feeding his equity to a jackhammer. The city didn't take sides, it followed measurements. Tape doesn't negotiate. And the most expensive thing in that yard wasn't the pool, it was the confidence that nobody would check. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.